Hello and welcome. My name is Martin Stürtzer and I'm an ambient and dub techno producer from Wuppertal in Germany. In this video, I'm going to show you how I used Stepic on different sequences and rhythmic patterns in my track Daybreak. In my track, Stepic triggers my Moog synthesizer to create a TB303 kind of sequence. I also used the note play mode so that I could trigger Stepic from the keyboard of my synthesizer. You can create a similar sound with a lot of different synthesizers, but please make sure that the synthesizer is able to play in a monophonic mode. If the synthesizer is polyphonic and plays several notes at the same time, the legato and slide function does not work. So you need to make sure that the synthesizer is either monophonic or that you can put it into a mode which is called legato or monophonic. My patch is very simple. I just used a square wave and lowered the filter frequency and applied a little bit of envelope to the filter. Let's have a look at the pattern again, and after that I will start again with a fresh patch to show you how I came up with something like that. When you load Stepic for the first time, it will give you an init patch with a row of 16 C notes. Once you start the clock of your host sequencer, it will start to play back the pattern. I want to have a more flexible approach and I don't want the sequence to play all the time. So I'm enabling a mode which is called MIDI play, and this mode allows me to trigger the sequence from my keyboard or a MIDI note in a MIDI clip. To do that, you need to click on this keyboard icon over here and switch the transport mode from sync to host to note on. What now happens is every time you play a note, the sequencer starts running. Now I want to make sure that my sequence is always in sync with the rest of the music. So I click on the quantization and switch it to on. Now Stepic will wait for the next full beat before it starts with the sequence. Let me show you how this works in the context of the music. Currently, the sequence is always playing from the same note, regardless which key I press. But if I want the sequence to play on different notes, I can use the transport function. And now the sequence is transposed depending on the key that I press on the keyboard. My track is in E flat, so I will first bring down the root note over here to an E. And then I will add some ties to make it a bit more interesting on the rhythmic side. And also maybe add some octave switches. And also it could be interesting to have some other notes than E. Now, a very interesting new function of Stepic 1.6 comes into play, and this is the legato mode. This means that in this case, step 9 sends a new pitch information, but the note is not triggered again because it's overlapping with step number 8. We can also do it here with an octave to make it a bit more drastic. Like this. Again, you need to check on your synthesizer if there is a function called legato or glide. On my Moog synthesizer, there is a dedicated knob to determine the time and the intensity of the glide. Another very typical thing for TB303 style bass lines are the accents. You can simulate this by the use of velocity. In the bottom row, you can switch to the velocity tab and change the velocity of the notes. I set my Moog synthesizer in a way that the velocity changes the cutoff frequency. You need to find out how that works with your synthesizer, but usually there's a modulation matrix or a dedicated knob to affect velocity and the filter frequency. Listen to what happens when I lower all the velocity steps. By the way, if you right-click on your mouse on any parameter of a row, you can use all of them just with one click. I set all the notes to a rather low value and will now use just 1 or 2 steps with a high velocity value to create those accents. So much for the bass line. Let's go to the percussions. I created a drum rack with 16 very short and tiny sounds to create some kind of glitch percussions. Let me play the samples for you. My idea was to use Stepic to create a random pattern which changes all the time with those sounds. Let's have a look at the final result first, and then I will walk you through the creation of this pattern. When I load Stepic, nothing happens because the C3, which is the root node of the init patch, triggers an empty part of my drum rack. So first I need to bring down the root node until it plays the first sample of my drum rack. I want Stepic to trigger all 16 sounds of my drum rack, so I start by making a little scale here. And now I'm having a problem because there is just 12 notes in the scale. So look what happens here. It nicely goes up, but then goes back to C. So for the last 4 notes, I need to use the octave switches in the octave lane, and then I can reach the next 4 sounds. And now it subsequently triggers all 16 samples of my drum rack. I want this to be randomized, so I click on this play mode icon and select the random or random skip. Random skip means that after one of those 16 steps is triggered, another step will be triggered, and that Stepic is not allowed to trigger the same step twice. So I think this one is the best. But now notice what happens when I play back the sequence. The upper row is almost never playing a note. This is due to the fact that the octaves down here and the notes up here are not matched. They are not locked into each other. And there is a new mode which is called lane lock, which means that the octave lane will be following the pitch lane. Now, whenever step 13, 14, 15, and 16 are triggered, I'm getting the higher octave of 13, 14, 15, and 16 with the octaves. And now the upper row is also playing on a regular basis. Let's listen how this sounds with the rest of the percussion and drum sounds. I like the sound of this percussion pattern, but I want it to slowly fade in and out and not play all the time. To achieve this, I'm again using the velocity lane and create something which looks a little bit like an LFO curve. Of course, you need to make sure that whatever sampler you're triggering is listening to the velocity. But here, when I solo this track, you can hear that it only plays when the higher velocity values are triggered. This is now very repetitive, and always the same parts of the beat are loud and always the same parts of the beat are silent. To change this, I can do different tricks. First, I can shorten the sequence or the lane to 13 steps so that it will not overlap with the same beats of the bar every time. So now there is a shift between the 4 on the floor beat and the 13 steps of my velocity sequence. And also I can click on the clock symbol and make it slower, which means that now with every 3 steps of my main sequencer, it just approaches 1 step down here. And now with the rest of the sounds, it will be very almost kind of random displacement of the notes. The last touch I would like to add is in the divider section. When I set it from 1 to 2, it will repeat the notes. And of course, this can also be in a random fashion, so that it creates a more interesting to listen to pattern. The third and last part I would like to talk about is another sequence which I played on the Arturia Mini Freak. Let's have a look at this one with a fresh patch. First, I need to set the note length to 8 notes. And reduce the overall length to 8 steps. And to make it more interesting, I'm using a new play mode, which is called Pendulum. It will make the sequence go backwards after it hits the end. You could also use ping pong, but then the last step would be repeated. Now I want the sequence to start very low and then slowly switch into higher octave ranges. So I'm using the octave switches here. And also I will use the clock, because now it would jump between the lower and the higher octave all the time. But when I set the clock to, let's say, every 3rd step, it it will start low and then slowly increase the pitch. You could also combine this with a random order of the notes. That would be very interesting because the sequence would be totally random, but you would also have a progression from low to high. So it would be like controlled randomness. It's not total randomness, it's a mix of structure and randomness. And I think this makes a sequence more interesting and more pleasant to listen to compared to a sequence which is just like total random. I hope that you enjoyed this video. For me, it was a lot of fun to create this track using the different new functions of Stepic, and I hope that you will have fun making your own music with Stepic. Thanks a lot for watching and see you next time.